Welcome to the Exhaust Notes Podcast.
Welcome to the Exhaust Notes Podcast. My name is Nick Engvall, and for today's episode, my co-hosts Todd Yates and Rohit Malhotra and I discuss breaking news that Haas F1 is making some major changes to their sponsors and potentially their driver lineup for Formula One in 2022. Formula One drivers have voted, and there are some serious changes in the works for 2022 as a result of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. With that in mind, if you're looking for ways to support the Ukrainian people, check out the links in the description for this episode. Now on to the show. Welcome to the Exhaust Notes Podcast. My name's Nick Engvall. I'm with my guys Todd and Rohit to talk some just crazy F1. This wasn't even a scheduled recording. This wasn't a scheduled podcast, but we figured that with all that's going on in the world, we should talk about the unmentionable, I guess, let's say.
Yeah, this is a very complicated subject that we're about to broach. And while we know that one of the principal parties, which I don't know if it's a Haas thing or if it's a inherent thing, is kind of viewed as a laughingstock. And I know one of us in particular feels very strongly about said individual, hopefully in their short tenure with Formula One. But Nikita Mazepin, come on down. You are the next contestant on Formula One Flashpoint. So who wants to use that as the segue to talk about the more serious things before I get silly again? I'll do it. It's fine. I'm Tracy McGrady. I will throw it off the alley-oop, and I will catch it, and I will dunk it. So because Russia is very insecure, and that is just my opinion and not that of my co-hosts or any of the companies we work for, they have decided that they want to take out Ukraine. And while this doesn't necessarily impact us from an American perspective, we all have global listeners, and we want to make sure first and foremost that everybody in Ukraine and the Eastern European bloc is being safe. And if this can even give you a temporary moment of respite, that's why we're here. But that being said, this is the latest in a laundry list of Russian infractions that has led to, but not limited to, them not even being referred to as Russia during the Olympics. And now we are going to see some ramifications in the Formula One world because per some sources on Formula One Twitter, which you know is as valid of a source as we can get, it was taken to a driver's vote, and all but one driver had decided we are not going to run in Russia if given the option. Now, I will let Todd clarify on who he thinks the one person is, and maybe there is a ulterior motive of why Senor Mazepin voted the way that he did, but at the same time, this just doesn't reflect poorly on him because, as Todd's going to allude to, there's more controversy anytime that man sets foot in a car or steps in front of a microphone. I was going to say microwave for some reason.
Maybe a microwave. Yeah. I when you guys talked about, hey, let's do a quick pod, and I was excited at the chance to dump on why I don't like Mazepin. So, So, as Rohit mentioned, we have this situation going on with Russia and Ukraine, and they had some actions in the last couple of days. The first being that Haas almost immediately decided to remove all of their sponsorship logos from Uralkali, whatever they make, manure or chemicals or something, fertilizer, I think it is. Fertilizer. They decided to remove all of their branding overnight. And then the drivers had a meeting the next day. And as you mentioned, all but one decided to vote to cancel the Russian GP, which is not officially official, but the FIA and F1 issued a statement that at this time they can't see how the Russian Grand Prix can progress. So they left themselves a little wiggle room, but they also immediately started selling tickets to Turkey. So we know generally what's the replacement race is going to be. But and then it's coming out now that the reason we decided to get together and talk about this is that it could even go further than that the Uralkali sponsorship deal might be completely off the table for Haas. There hasn't been any reports. Nick, you sent us that video of Gunter Steiner talking about that a little bit this morning. But the early rumors are that Uralkali is no more. And with that, our dear Nikita could be going bye-bye as well.
I mean, I'd personally just commend Haas for taking that quick action. And, I know that's not an easy thing to do when you're talking about, tens of millions of dollars being invested into your, racing company, but to have that type of integrity to me is super admirable. I hope that, it all kind of comes back around for them, whether that's, new sponsors or, just surviving, right? Like the sport we've talked about at length, the sport is an expensive, it's a rich man's hobby, more than anything. Right. And, I think of the teams that are out there, Haas is probably on the very bottom, if not, next to it slightly in terms of like the budget and the overall security in their future in the sport. And I think that kind of makes it even more of a tough challenge, like not to say that, that we or them or anybody doesn't know exactly where their line of integrity is. But when your business and all the people that work for you depend on that money to pay your employees and all of these things, to walk away from a sponsorship like that is really, really a tough decision no matter what, because you have to think about the livelihood of your people as much as you do everything else. So as I said in our text, I don't think that Mazepin will be back in a seat this year. I don't see how that could ever make sense again at this point. And I'm probably less, I probably come to that opinion in a less driver specific way than Todd, but it just doesn't make sense to me from a business standpoint for him to be involved. We've kind of loosely, suggested that his seat is largely connected to the investment that comes from your Alkali, who is the company's owned by his father, right? So, or primarily owned by his father. And listening to Gunther Steiner talk about it, I think that they're pretty clear that they still need to work out the legal ramifications from pulling the sponsorship, but you don't want to be the one, the one like sore spot in the sport either, right? On a very like, grandiose level, that's what they would become the longer they wait to take these actions. And I think that, again, I just say it's admirable that they're taking such quick action. And I think that based on them taking such quick action, they're just going to continue down this path, and they'll figure out how to bring in new sponsors. They'll figure out how to bring in, they have a pretty solid backup driver in Pietro Fittipaldi. So yeah, that's about all I got.
I mean, I think that's what most of us have. And granted, I will probably come across as a hypocrite because the team I support, Chelsea FC, is owned by a Russian oligarch who are now being targeted throughout the world. Because I'm glad that, to your point, Nick, we're all coming together and saying, hey, enough is enough. You can't do this. But at the same time, it's a sport that has always been propped up by shady business practices. Would that be fair to say?
Rich and it's energy.
Yeah. No, it is rich energy to propel this whole sport with so much rampant corruption. But at the same time, it is really something that we, for the first time in a long time, have seen Formula One draw a line in the sand and say, hey, this is where we're standing. And as polarizing as this sport, like most sports is, where you will have dissenting opinions and people will be on the opposite side of an argument just because they want to troll the person that's on that opposite side, it is reassuring to see that. Now, maybe I am playing devil's advocate. I would love to be a little bit more knowledgeable about why Nikita voted yes. Maybe there's something that we're not seeing. But right now, from a sheer optics perspective, there's nothing he can really say or do that's going to change his opinion in the court of public opinion.
It's so his family doesn't get disappeared, like I said earlier.
That's fair. Yep.
So I'm going to go on my rant now about why this guy sucks. So I actually, when I heard the news about Haas removing their sponsorship, I immediately felt bad for Haas. Like, their timeline has been just rough, right? They went from plucky upstarts to getting two drivers that like to crash into each other, to kind of getting past that, to getting new sponsorship, to getting two young drivers that like to crash into each other. And this whole thing feels a little bit like they're kind of getting bit for having Mazepin join in the first place. And I want to talk about Mazepin real quick. So he's at best a mediocre driver. His dad has bought every seat he's ever had, and his best finishes, I'll just go through his most recent history. So Formula 3 European Championship, got 10th. Next year, GP3 Series with Art, he got 2nd. So that's probably his best year to date. 2019, he in F2, he got 18th. 2019 also in the F3 Asian Championship, he got 3rd, but F3 Asia is kind of a mixed bag of people. 2020 in F2, I think, is probably his best year driving wise. He got 5th, but during that year, I remember a few things happening. Actually, going back to his F3 days, he punched a driver, full on attacked him in the paddock for blocking him in practice, who then he became his teammate of. It was Callum Ilott, for you guys that don't know. And after they'd broken him up, he went back to attack him. So then moving on to F2, I'll never forget this because I thought our poor little Yuki was going to get murdered that day. They were in Spa, and Yuki was basically passing Mazepin down the straight, and Mazepin thought it a good idea to just weave wildly and almost run Yuki into a wall. He then got a 5-second penalty and got 2nd in that race, which Yuki won. And like a petulant little child, went and kicked his 2nd place placard in front of his car out of the way, which then almost hit Yuki again. So I just, from the start, didn't like this kid. Moving on to right before he joined F1, he came under fire on social media for posting videos of himself whipping his father's Lamborghini Urus SUV in and out of traffic at like 100, and then decided it was a good idea to post a video of himself basically assaulting a girl by putting his hand down the front of her dress and then tagging her in a demeaning way on social media. And Haas pretty much just swept it all under the rug. So that's why I don't feel as bad for Haas in this situation, and I've never liked this kid. And then we saw what happened in their first year together at Haas with Mick Schumacher when they had their run-ins and, you know, who's getting favored and all of this stuff. But Mick Schumacher pretty much just wiped the floor with him. And this kid just really doesn't deserve to be in F1. And then had a little blunder just yesterday by saying, when he was asked about the Russia situation, he said he didn't mix sports and politics. And he's just really excited to be testing in Barcelona, et cetera, when a no comment. Like, all you have to do is be like, I don't want to talk about it, and just move on.
How noble of him is all I can say, because, you know, how dare my sports get in my politics and vice versa. But I tend to give people the benefit of the doubt, but especially that Yuki anecdote that you told me. First of all, Yuki is all of 5'3", maybe pushing it to 5'4". How is this dude getting so close to being hit by multiple things in a similar race week? That's the first thing, because he must be protected at all costs. He's like baby Grogu for me, where he represents a world of potential, and it's just on his teachers to get him there. And yes, in this case, Pierre Gasly is the Mandalorian. But yeah, I mean, it's the biggest thing I can say is there's nobody rushing to his aid in any way, shape, or form. And it was one of the things that, as you were talking, Todd, it made me think of this. So the reason why we had this show initially, indirectly, was Todd had sent a very nice pun that he had received from one of his other, I believe, was this one of your podcasting hosts of the other podcast?
No, it wasn't my other podcast. It was just my two longtime friends that have been into F1 that I do some like karting and racing with.
Perfect. So anyway, one of them authored a really good pun that was a catalyst for kind of getting us all together here on a Friday. And then we were kind of going back and forth with similarly Russian themed puns in our text thread. And if you join up to sign up for our Patreon, maybe in the next 5 years, we'll show you those secret texts. But for now, they will remain between the three of us. And it just struck me because the last time I saw a great Russian pun was, and I go back to this, the Secret Santa video of Formula One 2021, where Nikita Mazepin received some marzipan from somebody as the Secret Santa gift. And that was Esteban Ocon, now that I think about it. And the bitter beer face that man had let me know that if he can't even accept a great pun based off of his own name, he's probably not a good hang. And as we get older, a lot of us, we don't really want much, but we just want to chill hang whenever we hang out with somebody new. And Nikita Mazepin, you're not a chill hang, so I bid you a good Jew.
Well said. Well said. Yeah, I mean, I think, there's no real room in the sport, right? There's 20 drivers out there right now. Potentially we get a couple more teams if some of the rumors come to life in the next couple of years. But I think that I can't separate sports and politics. Being a decent human being is being a decent human being. It's not political, so I think that, if I'm Formula One, this is probably kind of in one way or in a lot of ways, just like, the best thing to happen for Haas and the sport, and, not to take away from the, the shitty things that are happening in the world, but like the benefit of all of that is that there's an unquestionable reason for making these changes right now.
Yeah, I really hope that if Gene Haas decides to pursue removing Uralkali as the title sponsor, that the F1 community, the FIA, F1 themselves, whatever, really try to prop up Haas however they can, because it's the right thing to do. And, they have a whole slew of driver options. So I don't think you're really losing any talent or any work from the development side that Haas has been working on. They still have Mick Schumacher, who's a great young driver. I think it overall could be a good thing, like you were getting at, Nick.
I think, too, the other kind of interesting thing that was brought up in the Discord, which we'll link in the description, Andy, Par from the Course Cards, longtime friend of mine who's been been in the trading card world, sneakers, like just great guy, kind of jokingly suggested that Netflix or Jordan Brand should sponsor the Haas car. And honestly, like both of those are spot on, incredible ideas in my opinion, right? Like I know that it might get a little interesting considering that Netflix and Formula One itself have like this massive partnership. But the idea of either of those to me is, at first I was kind of like, yeah, that's crazy. Haha, funny. And then I was like, damn, Jordan needs to expand his racing empire. There's no doubt that he has desires to do that. And Netflix, honestly, would bring so many more fans to the show from that I think it's a no-brainer almost. Like, how do you not go down this path to talk about it?
Nick,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm going to one-up you because that's what I do sometimes. There is a certain documentary that is automotive themed, but is not Formula One Drive to Survive, that was just released on Netflix this week. Do either of you know what it is?
I didn't see it.
Oh, was it the story of Bubba Wallace?
It was. Race. Yeah. The double entendre that we all never knew we needed, but we got, because that's the name of that documentary.
Wow.
And do you know who Bubba Wallace has recently partnered with in terms of one of his sponsors?
Yeah, Jordan Brand.
Jordan Brand. So, bit of spot on analysis. This is obviously the most fantasy of bookings, but you're telling me that if Jordan Brand brought over Bubba Wallace, not only do we prop up an existing one, in this case being a Formula One car company, but then we also simultaneously address the biggest frustration with the sport, which is a lack of diversity, by putting not only an American, but an African-American at that on this, which would then in turn increase and possibly lead to the 33 million new viewers that one of us called out in the last episode? I stand by this. I stand by this wholeheartedly.
I don't see Jordan Brand.
No, he won't.
I love that. I love that idea. Like if Jordan Brand made anything F1 related, I am a sucker. Take my money. But I don't see them getting into F1 because they can't they don't make race boots, right? They can't turn that into product really, other than slapping a logo on the car. The Netflix one, however, makes so much sense to me because they can do a season long advertisement to the giant base. I think there's a giant base of F1 fans. Like we talked about, I think it was 5 billion views globally last year. And there's, I don't know the subscriber count for Netflix, but it's not anywhere near that. Why not just slap the logo, a Netflix logo? It's not really
would you call it a conflict of interest?
I don't think so, right? That's the words I was trying to get out. Thank you. I don't think it would be a conflict of interest other than they're giving them money to put their logo on the car, and then the team runs by it's doing its own thing, right? Because it's not any sort of automotive product or anything, they're not going to have any sort of technological or development type of input into the team. It's just hey, look, there's the Netflix Haas car. And that makes so much sense to me that I've been thinking about it since yesterday, that why not just show the rest of the world Netflix is part of F1 even more so than the American base that's already picked it up.
I mean, Netflix is the reason why our American base is probably as strong as it is. The other thing I really am interested on in terms of a macro perspective is that is the last frontier that all these streaming services have avoided or not really made an effort to. But the minute, let's say, Netflix decides, hey, you know what? The TV contract with ESPN is expiring. Let's just go for it. Let's put that on as programming on our base, and maybe it increases the base service by, let's say, $2 to $3, because I truly think that is when things are going to get really interesting, when we start seeing leagues get associated with streaming services. And I would say, to Todd's point and to Nick's point, the closest relationship we have to that is Netflix and Formula One right now, because that's almost become a chicken and an egg situation for a lot of people, because Netflix was that first gateway drug, if you will, for people's Formula One exposure. And they realize it's not that complicated of a sport if you let the personalities shine.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I don't think that it is a conflict of interest, but I think there are a lot of, I say this in the most loving way possible, I think there are a lot of whiners in the pits, in the paddocks, on the grid. And I think that inevitably you would have people then clamoring for more airtime, right? Because one of the unspoken things that happens behind the scenes with this whole Netflix Drive to Survive series is Red Bull is seen by tens of millions of people because the brand is on the car. The car gets a bunch of time because it's one of the top runners. And, and I know that Netflix has done a good job of mixing it up and dispersing that exposure, but I could see how, look, we talked about, teams complaining about millimeters on the back wing a couple episodes ago. And I think that personally, I don't think there would be conflict, and I think it would work well, but I think eventually you would have people complaining about the exposure level for the team that had the Netflix sponsor on the car.
Make a spin-off series and call it Haas to Survive.
Yes.
Boom.
I was saying,
this team Haas to Survive.
They're selling Sunset, they're selling Tampa, and now Haas to Survive is the next of these spin-offs that is hopefully more CSI Miami than Joey.
Joey. No, seriously, that's a great point, Nick. I think there's just the world of politics that's contained within F1. Not mentioning wars. But like you just mentioned, Red Bull and Max, the face of Red Bull, decided to not participate in the last season of Drive to Survive. So why should they get that shine on Netflix? You know what I mean? Yep. Granted, they're a front running car, so they're going to get airtime, but as you also mentioned, they specifically spend a certain race weekend with a certain team, and they tell their story from that team's perspective. So and that's why we get all the weird like dramatization of like, oh, you know, we're with McLaren this weekend. They're fighting for P4, which not as many people care about, but, oh, is there beef between the teammates or whatever? But throw that all out the window. I think I just had $1 million idea. Make a spinoff series focused on Haas, tell all of their stories. They're all characters. Like Gunter Steiner is the best.
He's Michael Scott.
Yeah, he is the best part of Drive to Survive, in my opinion. Fuck, smash my door.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the best thing that ever came out of Drive to Survive. So just do that.
We are rock stars or we are wankers.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't used the term wanker in my life ever, but I've used it consistently for the last 18 months plus.
Yes.
No, my favorite part is this dude lives somewhere in North Carolina. And just one day, I want to run into him at his local Aldi's and be like, what are you doing here, man? You should be in Monte Carlo. Hell, even Paris. You're in bum F, North Carolina. Like, what's keeping you here? It's not Gene, because we know, based on the episodes, that he loads the minute that Gene calls him, because it's just literally watching a human react viscerally to nails on an invisible chalkboard anytime he talks to his boss, which some of us have had that reaction when we do talk to our superiors. But my goodness, you just keep going back to that. Well, Gunther, take a bit for your mental health, please. I beg you.
Yeah.
So, moving forward, it sounds like we should know more next week on not only the Air Alkali situation, but the legalities around that, and also the aforementioned fate of I was trying to say the Harry Potter guy's name, but I couldn't. Voldemort's name. Yeah.
He does kind of look like a young Voldemort. Get him out of here.
He does, and he's got a British accent. It's just, if you're going to be Russian, all right?
Yeah. If it bleeds, it bleeds.
Yeah, exactly. Ivan Drago style.
Sorry, dies, it dies. Anyway.
Yeah, so we don't know officially yet what's going on. It sounds like the Air Alkali is pretty much on its way out. And when I was looking up articles right before this recording, there's a lot of news sites out there and Formula One Twitter talking about who the next driver could be for Haas, which, Nick, you mentioned Pietro Fittipaldi. He's their development driver, so that's an obvious fit. There's also talk about Nico Hülkenberg, which we love him. He's the journeyman. He'll come back for a race if you need him. I'd love to see Hulk back in a car. And then there's also talk about Oscar Piastri, who's the F2 champion from last year, that kind of in a political way got screwed out of a car because he's super, super talented, dominated F2, should be in a car, but didn't have the backing, didn't have the right relationships, et cetera, et cetera. So those all would be exciting prospects to see in Voldemort's stead. But yeah, that's where we are.
Let's end on a fun note. Did any of us see the Alfa Romeo livery? Because I still don't see it. I think that camo's working overtime.
Yeah, I think that camo is working overtime because I haven't seen it either.
I did proclaim on the last podcast that if they ran that livery, that I would buy their kit. I'm going to clarify that they have to run it in a race because they did release the kit, and the sweatshirt is $162, not including shipping or tax.
There better be $100 bill inside that RFID label.
Oh my God. That's so. Why is F1 clothing so expensive?
That is an awkward conversation to have with the significant other of all of us, I'm sure, where we're like, hey, I like this thing. Oh, yeah. How much is it? X plus 100, because that's usually how Formula One pricing seems to work.
Mm.
Yep.
My wife didn't really bat an eye when I bought the McLaren Danny Rick team kit, but I don't think she knew it was $90 for a shirt.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I'm sure we're all going to run into that conversation next Tuesday when, speaking of Danny Rick, the McLaren Lego kit will be there, and then we will commence on our Lego kit building episode where we'll just gab like a bunch of gals in a knitting circle, except we'll be using Lego pieces.
Can't wait.
Looking forward to it. I guess that's what we'll leave you with. Look forward to that coming soon to an Exhaust Notes episode in the future. But guys, let them know how they can find you on the other platforms.
RoadM13 on IG, but here's the rhyming part. On Twitter at Roheezy.
On IG at T-Yeezy. And I have reactivated my Twitter thanks to Nick's peer pressure. It is HackJandy11. And
you can find me at Nick Engvall on all the platforms. Hit the link in the description and join us on the Discord. And hopefully we can continue this conversation in between episodes. We'll catch you on the next one. Peace.
Stay safe, Ukraine.